This video is a tutorial that accompanies and visualizes your Confederation Debates transcription user guide. During the next half hour or so, you will learn how to use Dropbox, download your files, and store your changes. You'll also learn how to use Google Drive and suggest Confederation quotes of the day or applicable content for the lesson plans that our education committee is making. Finally, you'll learn how to install and use Composer to edit individual HTML files. I know this isn't the fanciest video, but I think it'll be a good teaching tool. Training everyone live on Skype would literally take me days, if not a week, to do, so I made this video out of necessity. So, to begin, you're going to need Dropbox. If you don't already have a Dropbox account, please get one at the link in your user's guide at step 1. You may need to pause the video while you complete this step. Once you have an account, download the software at the link in step 2. You may need to pause the video while you complete this step. We're also going to use Google Drive for aspects of this project. If you don't already have a Google account, please go to the link on the user's guide, step 1, and then create an account. There is also a program you can download for Google Drive, but I don't find it's as good as Dropbox's, and I don't use it. Next, we need to download and install the HTML editor that you'll use to actually view the OCR'd files. To do this, go to composer.net/download as shown in your user's guide, and make sure you install the latest development version, or 0.8b3. To do this, just scroll down to the Other Systems and Languages, select English US, and then select the correct file, the correct installer or disk image for Windows or Mac. Then run the file when it's done downloading and install the software. While you're on this site, scroll down to the bottom to the Dictionary and Language Packs, find the English British, and download the file. To install the dictionary, first run Composer, and then click on Tools and run down to, on PC it'll be Extensions, and on Mac it's Add-ons. Open this up, click Install, and then you'll have to navigate to where the file is stored. So open it up. It says unsigned. Now we install it. Now we restart Composer. And that's that. Next, you're going to need to configure Composer's advanced settings. So open the preferences. It's in slightly different places on Mac and PC, but once you've located it, go to the Advanced tab on the left side. Now here it's extremely important that your settings exactly match the screenshot in the user's manual. Okay? My settings already do, but you need to toggle them to match exactly. And the reason is this: if they are not exactly the same, Composer will actually change the code that's in the background, something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. If you do not change these settings to exactly match the user guide, and I do emphasize they need to be exactly the same, please double, triple check. If you don't, it would be like making a bunch of formatting changes to a document in MS Word with styles, and then exporting the file as a TXT file, a plain text file. You would lose all of that information. So please take the time, make sure that these settings are exactly as they appear in the screenshot. Again, if you need to, take a minute, pause this video, and go and make the changes. Once that's done, click OK to store the settings. And I always like to go back into Preferences briefly and just make sure that they are in fact set right. Now you're ready to actually start working with the files. So on Dropbox, once you've given me your username, I will populate your directory. You can see I have some for several different transcribers here. There are many more to come, about another 20 to go. More if we get more volunteers, and they're coming in every week. But you'll have a file folder, and you'll have you'll have the files here. I've just created a sample here, but others will have many, many more files like you see here. Open the JPEG. Then go into Composer, open. You're going to go to the directory. See, I'm in the same place on Dropbox. My directories will be a little different than yours. Open the file. Okay, and this is the way you're going to work, with the original on the left and the new file on the right. So the first thing you want to do right away, you're going to input your name and then the date. 1601, and today is the 16th. You're going to want to check the page numbers to make sure they're right. Now, this is an OCR page. That means we've taken this image and run it through software that tried to turn it into searchable text. The problem is, of course, OCR doesn't always get it right. So the first thing I want you to check right off the hop is, did it get the page numbers right? Or in the case of this file, the column numbers correct, which is why you see two numbers here. And in fact, they are correct in both the search text and in the green box. So you need to check both. Now, your guide goes through several editing guidelines. I'm just going to go through them very quickly here, but they are all repeated in your guide. First of all, and this is most important, always reproduce exactly what you see. We want to be exactly true to the original. So you see after as well, there's a space. Well, you look here, there's a space there as well. Obviously, we don't do this today. The original does. We want to replicate that, okay? Your guide also mentions several things that the OCR software often gets wrong. So it often misspells names. The reason for that is simple. The OCR actually uses an AI, that artificial intelligence, that looks at a word. If it gets most of the letters pretty clear, then it'll guess on the rest if it has to. So in this case, fielding, it got wrong. Now, with normal words, it can guess the remaining words. So if you have a word like minister and it gets everything but the T right, it can guess that that's probably a T. The problem with names is the spellings vary, so they're much more likely to be wrong. So just go in and correct it. Similarly, numbers are often transcribed incorrectly. Again, because it can't guess at the numbers around it, because there's no rules. Every number will have its own different digits, unlike names, or unlike normal words, not names. Punctuation is sometimes wrong or just added unnecessarily. Okay? So for example here, with comments, that does not need to be there. So we're going to delete it, because it's not in the original. The word I, as in me, is often miscorrectly transcribed by the software as a number 1 or as an L. So it's good to be aware of that as you're reading. And lastly, highlighted words, as you saw with fielding, as you saw here. The software we use to OCR this material has a certainty variable. In other words, it actually tells us word by word how sure it is that it got the word right. And if it's less than, I think we said 70%, it highlights it in yellow. So you will need to read the entire text, but it's important that you also pay special attention to words that are highlighted. So here, it thinks there's some extra characters. Turns out there was a little imperfection in the document. So we're going to delete that. Same thing here. You get the idea. They do tend to correctly emphasize words that are wrong, but it's not necessarily the case. For example, here, fielding is again spelled incorrectly. And it's missing the period. In fact, all of these need a period on the end. You get the idea. I'm not going to correct the whole document, but you see where this is going. Next, in your list, do not attempt to format tables like the one shown in your example here. The problem is they have a lot of formatting, so how far indented are they, all sorts of things like that. How far apart do we put the columns? That's something our HTML encoders, who are much more advanced in their knowledge of HTML than you likely are, will deal with. Instead, I simply want you to go through the text and make sure that the words are spelled correctly and that the numbers are all transcribed correctly. Does that make sense? And then we want you to do the same thing with quotes. So for example, we have a quote here. Mr. Robertson says, and then it's stated. You can see that the text is a slightly different size. Sometimes these will also be indented, but not necessarily so. In the original, as you'll see, it's not. Again, please do not try to change the text size or indent anything. Leave it as it is, and just make sure that the text is transcribed correctly, that all of the words and letters and punctuation match the original. We'll worry about applying styles to it at a later point. The team of XML editors will worry about that at a later date. Similarly for paragraphs, you'll notice that none of my paragraphs are indented when in the original they are. Again, don't worry about it. The importance is that the paragraphs appear together. More on that in a second. Before we get to the discussion of paragraphs, which is a little more technical, I also want to mention this right here. This is an indicator that Mr. Spruly is speaking from the previous page and that it continues to hear. So instead of at the beginning mid-sentence with the name again at the start of every new page, they just indicate it down here at the bottom, so that if you're going from the previous page, I'll actually pull it up for you. So if you were going from the previous page, where Mr. Spruly is speaking the entire time, to the next page, it'd be really annoying to see Spruly at the top here again and interrupt, essentially, his sentence as you're reading. So instead, they put it, like I said, they put it down here. We, however, do not need to keep that. This is one of the very few things I actually want you to delete. So when you see only this at the bottom of a page, and as you saw with this example, it's not always at the bottom, but it sometimes is. When it is, I want you to delete it. Okay? Do not delete any of the other names, though. Now, paragraphs. This is where things start to get a little more complicated. Not too bad, though. So, for example, here, this is a great example. We have a paragraph, and as you'll see in the screenshot I give you in the user's guide, shown right here, right, we want to use that white bar. The white bar is right here. The purpose of this white bar is to indicate where a paragraph begins and ends. Do not use these red lines. Now, as you can see in the original, this paragraph goes on right down to Mr. Fielding here. And yet when I click, you see the little white bar here and the larger white bar here. That means that the software is considering this to be 3 separate paragraphs. So what does that mean? Well, we actually need to look at the code. Now on PCs, the image is a little bit different, or the interface is a little different, but these tabs at the bottom, design and source, are the two you're going to use. I think on PC it's normal and source. When I go into the source, this is the actual HTML code. Ignore the stuff at the top here. But now, this is where it actually starts in earnest. So you have a P and a /P. Now in your guide, as it explains in step 6, page 7, every paragraph begins and ends with a P/P, right? P/P. What that does is it has the original text, and then it puts a tag around it saying, here's where a paragraph begins and a paragraph ends. Think about it just like if I were to highlight this text and try to make it bold. What the software actually does, even if this was a word processor, is puts a tag at the front, strong or a B, in those same little brackets, saying B and then /B or strong/strong on the end. Here's where the bold starts, here's where the bold ends. In the same manner, HTML puts a P/P around your paragraph. Now, as you can see, it's done several paragraphs. So we've got paragraph 1, and then we have, where are we here? Paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, right? And this is all before we get to Fielding. So what we're going to do is do not use the backspace key. Instead, go to the previous paragraph and hit the delete key. Now you can see my bar gets bigger. I'm going to do it again and bring this section and this section together. Again, I put my paragraph at the end of the previous paragraph that I want to merge with the next and hit delete. My bar got bigger again. Now this is a single paragraph, and when I go into here, again, you're going to be P/P. No /P's in between to break it up sooner. It is now a single paragraph. This is the advantage of using Composer. It's called a WYSIWYG editor, or what you see is what you get editor. We can make these sorts of changes in a visual interface, which limits the amount of coding you need to do. I explain it to you here so that you get comfortable with the idea of when you're working here, what it's actually doing here. So to give you one more example, let's say I want to add some text. So I go here and actually, no, let's not do that. We'll change this to 2012. Okay, I've changed that number here. When I go into the source, 2012 appears right there. Similarly, I can change it back to 2016 here, and there, it's 2016 as well. So to get back to the paragraph issue, it is important, in fact, it's imperative, that you make sure all of the paragraphs match the originals. So you'll go through the document just like I am here, and make sure that the paragraphs are actually the same as the original. So I've got a big paragraph here, I've got a smaller paragraph here, I have an even smaller one here, and you get the idea. Okay, I'm not going to go through and do the whole entire document, but you see what I'm doing. You're going to go and do that through the entire document. Once that's done, we're going to need you to mark break. The other thing you should know is that we want to preserve these individual lines, right? It makes, by keeping these lines as they are and not trying to merge them like that, it makes it much easier to read. So if I'm down here and I have entered, I can look at the original, I can find the have entered fairly quickly, right? And then I can continue working. Those are indicated in this file with BR, or line break, BR standing for break. We want to preserve all of that for now. At a much, much, much later date, I will, and the other programmers will delete that information, but we need you to preserve it. Do not delete those line breaks. We want you to keep them, okay? What we need you to do, though, is, as you can see in the original here, Spruley is talking, it is my duty to deal with a government measure, blah, blah, blah. And then he continues talking in the next column, right? The text spills over. Now, in Composer, the problem is that it considers those to be separate paragraphs. As you can see here, my white bar is separate for each of them. So we want to preserve that. We're not telling you to delete any of it, because for the time being, we want to preserve the data as it is. We do, however, want to also tell Composer that this is also a column break. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to find this text in the source code. Okay? So it is my duty. Where is the principles? Sometimes it's easier to look for the bigger paragraph. Is it here? The principles. Here we are. So then here's Spruley. That actually needs to be changed, but it is my duty to deal, right, break, with the government measure, and with government behind that measure, and with, right, break each time. And then we see that /p. Here's the paragraph. Then there's also a div. You don't need to worry about that. But again, it's a slash. In HTML, a slash preceding any sort of tag means it's the end of something. So we want to go to the end of it, so it's a /div and then a div. So they end a div and then they start a new div. So what you want to do is hit enter and then add the command, the tag hr / and then close the bracket. The hr indicates that there is a formatting change. In this case, we're going to use that marker much, much later on, or I'm going to use and the programmers are going to use, you're not going to use, you're just going to mark it, saying there's a column break here. I'm still preserving the paragraph information for the preceding paragraph, for the preceding paragraph, and for the next paragraph, right? All I'm doing is adding that HR. But when I go back to the design, there's now this gray heavy line separating the originals to let me know I did it right, okay? The reason we're doing this is, remember those page numbers at the top? What we're going to be able to do later on, again, me and the other programmers, not you, is we can do a search for that HR that you enter, and because there's paragraph numbers in this document rather than page numbers, we can say everything before that HR break belongs to 3015. Everything after that break belongs to 3016. And we can write code that will automatically do that for us so that people doing the XML markup later on won't have to do all of this manually. Now, some of you will have documents that have page numbers rather than column numbers, but that still have columns. So it will have a page number in the middle, but then still have 2 columns. That's okay. We still want you to mark the columns. There are other reasons that we might need that information. So everybody, if you have a columned document, which the vast majority of you will, every time you see a column start and end, then you want to put the HR in the middle. We do not need to put an HR on the end here, right? So if we had 3 columns, you would put 2 HRs in. If you only have 1 column, you're not going to bother at all. Okay, that's the last hard part. The final thing we need to do is, let's assume you found a really interesting quote. And you think it would make a good quote of the day. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open the Google Sheet that I will invite you to. It will look something like this, okay? You're going to scroll down to the bottom, and you're going to input the text much like I have here. So you're going to input the speaker's name, the publication it's from. In this case, it was the British Columbia's Legislative Council. You're going to input the date it was spoken on, and it's a standardized date, so it's easy to read. The page number, your name, and then you're going to copy and paste the quote. Okay? Don't worry about this section. That's for the social media committee who will work with your quotes. You just do columns A to F. Now, in practice, let me show you something. So let's say let's use the quote we have here. I'm just going to grab some text at random. I don't know if this is any good. I haven't read it. I'm just using it for an example, right? So we click to apply. We know this is by Spruley. You would also input his first name. I just don't remember off the top of my head. The publication is the House of Commons debates. The date is, it's not on this page, but it will be on the next page, which is 23 March 1905. So 23 Mar 1905. There we go. It is page number 3015. I am Daniel Height. Now, if I simply go, you need to know that Google Sheets does not let you do copy-paste. So if you go paste, it's going to tell you what the hotkeys are. It wants you to learn the hotkeys. So I'm on a Mac, so it's Command-V. So if I go Command-V here, it pastes them as a series of cells. Now, what Google Sheets is doing is it's actually trying to be helpful. What it's doing is it's noticing that you have all of these line breaks. And it's saying, oh, well, you probably want those to be pasted as separate cells. So it's trying to do you a favor and split the data up for you just like it's split up in the original. The problem is we really don't want that. We want the whole quote in that cell here. So I'm going to undo that change. And instead, and again, this is described in your user's guide, right here. It's this step here. You're going to go, and instead of clicking the cell, or instead of pasting just after clicking the cell, you're going to then also click to the right of this effects symbol. So this is the formula bar. And now go Control-V after clicking to the left of the effects, or to the right of the effects, and hit Control-V. And then hit Enter. Now it's pasted as a single cell. The line breaks are still preserved. There's not an easy way around that. What we would prefer is if you can go in manually, please, and just delete those breaks so that they appear correctly. You can see how that doesn't take very long. If you can please do that for every quote you put in, otherwise our social media team will literally have to take hours doing this for all of the quotes you find. It just takes you a couple minutes. Now that code is ready for consideration by the social media committee, the changes are automatically saved, and we're good to go. That's all there is to it. So whenever you find a quote that is interesting, funny, very thoughtful, prophetic, really stupid, even a little bit racist, include it. We can't promise we're going to include all the quotes. We're going to need 365 of them. I would hope that we have 700 or 800 that you suggest. That's the goal. So please be liberal with the number of quotes you put in. Be very generous about it. If you think it's remotely interesting, include it. Obviously, try to keep them shorter. Really long quotes won't work so well because we do have to get it down to 140 characters for Twitter. But don't feel you need to edit the quote. Copy and paste the chunk of text, and then we'll edit it down if we need to. Okay? I'm just going to delete that. So then the last thing is very similar to what I just showed you. We also have an education committee that is developing lesson plans that use content from each province and puts them in lesson plans that cater to each province's history curriculums for the Confederation period. We're usually aiming at a grade 7 or 8 age bracket. So what we're doing here is we want you to find quotes as you're doing the transcription reading. Remember, we're consulting you as content matter experts for these public history deliverables. We want you to find text that kind of is very well-spoken examples of the core issues that we're dealing with for each province. And I'm going to consult you on what those core issues are, and we'll pick them for each province, and I'll send an email out saying what they are. For Ontario and Quebec, it's going to be the concept of rep by pop, or representation by population, which is a shorthand for majority rule of the English over the French, as far as both sides were concerned at that point, or Protestant over Catholic, take your pick. We're going to do rep by pop versus the discussion about minority rights, which could take the form of, in the case of Ontario and Quebec, French-Canadian minority rights, be they in Quebec against British North America's English Protestant majority, be they Franco-Ontarians in Ontario, be they English Protestants in Montreal and the surrounding areas. Again, rep by pop versus minority rights. When you find very good, profound statements, or even just fairly good statements, copy and paste them here. And as you can see, it follows a very similar format. The speaker's name, the book it's from, the date, the page number, and your name, and then the quote itself, and then just indicate what the theme was. Don't worry about the other columns to the right. It doesn't really matter. Okay? Those are for the education committee, not for you to work with. They just have different purposes. So that's the complete tutorial. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn how to do this. If you have any questions, please contact me on Skype or via email. Thank you for your time.